You did wear a nice shirt. What happened?
Well, I just, I was really conscious. I didn't wear anything with patterns because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't doing anything weird for you.
Oh, that's true. Well, hello, everyone. I'm glad that you can join us. We're on about 2 minutes early just to let the bandwidth flow through. I'd love to hear from everybody, if you haven't typed in the chat bar already, where you're calling in from. I'm in Los Angeles, downtown LA. It might get a little noisy here. And Patrick, where are you?
I'm on the west side. I think we're technically in Los Angeles, though we're kind of in this little corner that's a little bit Los Angeles, a little bit Playa Vista, and a little bit Culver City. So, but it's about 10 degrees cooler here than it is where you are almost every day of the week. So I like it.
Yes, you always make me feel that way, right?
I do. Of course, you can walk everywhere you go. So
yes. Well, it looks like Sunday says she's also from Studio City.
Oh, awesome.
That's awesome. And then, of course, Julia's in downtown Los Angeles. And then Eva is at the Fairfax district. Dog sitting. Wow. That's awesome. And then we have Dominique, who's from the Netherlands. Hello. Wow, that's awesome. And then Donna's from Florida. Well, wonderful. It's great to see everyone.
Cupertino. Oh, lovely.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And there must be a beautiful town. I've actually never been to Cupertino. Have you?
I have. Yeah, we're actually doing a couple of projects up there.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Hey, guys. So there's been a lot of people who registered for this event, but not everyone's here, probably because it's still 5 p.m. on the West Coast. So if you could, please use the share button underneath the video and let everyone know we're getting started. Donna says she just moved from California a year ago and she misses LA. I don't know if you're missing that much.
It hasn't changed a whole lot.
I know from Florida, I think it's like the same.
There's a new skyline down. There's a new skyline downtown.
Oh, there is a new, and it's getting really filled up.
Yes, it is very quickly.
And Bernardo from Philly. Hello, Bernardo. I'm so glad. Yay. Oh, is that Amanda? Hey,
that's Amanda. Yes. As long as Paul doesn't get on, I think I'm safe. So.
Oh, it's good to have your fans on here.
It is. They can heckle me.
Exactly. Okay, so we're going to get started. And again, if you can share that out, that'd be very, very helpful using the share button underneath. Also, we have a questions and topics tabs, which is, again, underneath our video feed. If you have any questions, we're going to be giving away a book today for the most interesting question. And Patrick doesn't know, but he's going to be choosing it. Anyhow, so the book is called Signage Systems and Information Graphics, a Professional Source, which Patrick, you say is a great book. So
which one was that? Was that the Ubeli?
Andreas Ubeli, yeah.
Yes. Good book.
Good book. Okay, great. Yeah. So we will give one of those away today at the end of the session, depending on the questions that are underneath again. So put your questions and topics underneath. Welcome to Typography Dojo. I am Rachel Elnar, and I am your host today. I'm also the producer of TypeEd. We are a typography education program here in Los Angeles, and we're joined today with Patrick Fredrickson, all the way from the west side of Los Angeles at Altitude Design Office. Thank you, Patrick, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
You want to tell us a little bit about what you do there at Altitude?
Absolutely. I'm the project director here at Altitude Design Office. We're an environmental and three-dimensional branding firm or three-dimensional storytelling firm. So we do wayfinding projects, we do signage projects, we do branded environments of any variety. My history coming here comes from the museum background. So I'm very used to working with users and getting into developing spaces. And so I kind of came from the in-house museum world, and then now I've moved to the exterior, building out signage for stadiums and residential products and retail places. And, so now I'm working on more city stuff rather than things that curators want me to say. So, yeah.
Can I ask you, did you get started in doing environmental graphics and museum design, or where did you go to school? How did you get to what you do?
That's I didn't go to school for design. I went to school for fine arts. I have a photography and a printmaking background. And luckily, the printmaking background really introduced me to how to pull apart images, how to separate colors. I was doing screen printing, lithography. The photography program was had a non-silver photography portion to it, so we're really making up our own images. So that got me used to paper and whatnot, which was really great when I started getting into design. But I didn't get into design until, like, I think 3 or 4 years after I graduated from college. When I just realized, hey, like, this is something that I can do. I was a personal chef at the time and a professional dancer at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And interestingly, when I went to my professors and I said, hey, I think I'm going to do this, they said, well, most of what you've learned in fine art is the same type of theory that you need to do good design practice, but what you really need to understand is typography. And so focus on that. And so that's what I did. I focused on typography and how to use the tools, and then moved out to LA without a job, and walked the street and hustled, and somehow 6 months after I moved here, I got hired at the Getty to do exhibition design. So I did a little bit of, like odd, like mom and pop type design stuff. I did in-house design I was designing the coupons on the back of register receipt tape for a while.
Really?
Yes.
And
that was great experience. Yes. And from that, I then got the job at the Getty somehow. And so really most of my design career has been in building environments, which is really interesting because it's not the kind of thing that was hardly even being talked about 15 years ago, much less being studied. And it's definitely a multi-sensory design practice where you're doing print design, you're interacting with motion design, you're doing product design, and it's always been user focused. So like this new sort of user experience focus of design surprises a lot of us because we've always been engaged with users. So we're really glad that everybody's starting to pay attention.
Finally doing what you've been doing this whole time, right?
This whole time. This whole time, yes.
Excellent. And you're at Altitude Design Office right now, right?
Yes, and I'm at Altitude Design. I've been here for just over 3 months. And it's a young firm. Greg has had this firm for the past 2 years, and he comes from an interiors and from a branding background, working at Gensler, and then started this. And he has a great philosophy about design. I really like the way that he's running his practice, and we're doing we just keep getting really good projects. So really exciting, and really exciting to help build a business at the time as well. So great. I'm liking it.
Awesome.
Yep.
I'm gonna warn you, we're gonna hear some honking from our streets here because it's about rush hour in downtown. Awesome. So I know, wonderful, right? So what we'll do is just jump right into the presentation, if that works for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So I got your screen open.
All right. So the government controls your type. The title for this actually came up earlier this year when Rachel asked me, or when Rachel put a call out for a Patrick Fredrickson talk. And at that time, I was right in the middle of dealing with a city project where we had gotten buy-in on everybody in the city until we got to one group of engineers that just kept pushing a set of standards on us that we had never had to deal with before. And so coming from museums and coming from dealing with users, I'd always been, working with ADA guidelines and how to talk to people within those standards. Now I had to deal with things like MUTCD standards, fire code standards, things like that, which are just part of the practice. But this one, really just, had a bunch of people at the firm I was at the time kind of hustling to make it work. And what just became interesting to me was that when people talk about typography, they hardly ever talk about the regulations that can go around typography. And when it comes to designing signage, there's a lot of regulations that come into play. So there's a lot of regulations that come into materials and design and pictograms. And if people want to ask questions about that, I'm happy to discuss a lot of those things. But I'm really focusing just on some of the elements of type right now, and then we'll see where the conversation goes from there.
Sounds good.
So the government controls your type. Oops, I think I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. So, these are some of the pictures that companies use to sell their wares, right? This is what we oftentimes see in awards ceremonies, in awards catalogs, and on websites are the really big pictures, the really big signs. They've got great light, and they're important. There are a lot of regulations that go in with these that get into sign code regulations for parts of the city, and of course those regulations affect how you can develop type, and it has to connect to the branding of the site as well. So if you've got a really long title like Saban Media Center or Hollywood Park Casino, that's certainly affect how you can stack the type, and how visible you can make it depending on what the conditions are of the city. And I think what I like is that there's as you keep going further, once you've arrived someplace, you've seen those really big signs, you then have to begin navigating the space. And again, we are looking at things that oftentimes show up on websites where you've got these very beautiful directionals, you've got this nice use of materials, it's really pretty and sculptured viewpoints. They become interesting. And if you look at any of my Pinterest boards, you'll see that they're just filled with things like this for inspiration. We go a little bit deeper, and now you're getting into levels and more environments. Who doesn't want to make a big Nike sign with slatted wood like that? Who doesn't want to bend a 3 like that? It's all really impressive. Something that's missing from all of these certainly is that there's no people in the picture. They're all just really pretty pictures. And at the end of the day, these are supposed to be there to help brand a space and get people to understand where they're going more comfortably. So the final stage that you ever get to in wayfinding or in any type of environmental design is making sure that people know that they have arrived. And so room signs are kind of the most basic things that you get to know. These are really detailed, really beautiful room signs, I think. And this is where a lot of elements of regulation come into play, which we'll start looking at, I think, in just a second.
Those are really gorgeous.
Aren't those nice?
Yeah, they're so beautiful.
And photography does a lot of really good stuff.
Yes, that helps.
So, at the very basic, these are the questions that we need to ask people. Is when you're trying to go anywhere, whether you're trying to drive in a car, whether you're trying to get in a plane, any sort of route that you're taking, you need to know where you are at the moment, where you're going, if you know how to get there, and can you follow the route. Those are kind of the basic principles of a wayfinding program. At least that's what we say all the time. But then I want to add this other thing in there, which is, do you feel safe? And that comes from, if you don't feel safe, then how can you really focus on anything else around you, right? So I might know where I am, but I also might be scared, right? And I might know where I'm going, but I might be running because there's a fire. And I might know how to get there, but I'm confused because there's a lot of people around me. And can I follow the route? Well, I hope so, but if the conditions change, then then do I need to adjust? So the way that people learn and the way that people use spaces is with maps and text, is how that's sort of cognitive learning. Some people are really good at reading text and looking at maps and kind of understanding where they are in space and how they're going to get to where they're going next. Some people are verbal communicators, so they need to be told or they need to hear what's going on. Some people need to see visual features, so follow the blue stripe, look at that landmark down the hall. These are the things that some people picture. And then personal interaction, like, do you actually talk to somebody so that they can describe it? And this is something I learned from the museum world, is any of us are probably good at one of these modes of thinking and modes of learning, but none of us is good at all of them. And so whenever we define the user what I try to think about is the fact that the user is very complicated because, especially for a public space, the user comes in all of these forms and you're trying to talk to them all at the same time, right? So if you're, showing up to a football game and you're going into a new arena, right? You've got thousands and thousands of people who all know how to navigate a space completely differently. And of course, many of them are inebriated, so they can't see very well either. And yet you're trying to make the most comfortable experience possible, and the safest experience possible. And of course, are you in a rush? As soon as that again is once you begin feeling uncomfortable, it becomes a little bit more problematic. So my belief is that design is here to connect the user to the goal, right? So the goal is coming from whatever the problem is that needs a solution, whatever the client's asking for, whether it's, creating a very detailed space, a really nice, elegant experience, whether it's trying, you're doing advertising, you're trying to drive sales. But something that I heard a long time ago that's always stuck with me is that when you do design, as a designer, you're the last voice between the product and the user. So we have a responsibility to really argue for everything that the user needs, or the environment needs, or like anything that can be good. As long as you're achieving that goal, it's your voice to be the voice of the user. I've always kind of held that. And so when frustrations happen in signage design, I try to take a step back and say, well, wait a second, who's actually using this? And what's the purpose of that? And is there any reason to get bothered by it, or is there just a reason to kind of work past it? So these are the people that we're dealing with, the young people, people with physical disabilities, people with mental disabilities, right? People who are tourists, children are trying to find their ways, people with children are trying to find their ways. If you're visually impaired, if you're a daily user, so you're somebody who can just look past everything, you already have it mapped out, or making a delivery. What about the UPS driver? He's just trying to get in, drop something off and run away. If you're there to make a delivery and you can't navigate the space very quickly, then efficiencies go down and companies begin losing money, right? So, all of these people are using any given space at the same time, and these are the people that we're talking to. And then, of course, is there a fire, right?
Right.
One of the things that we talk about generally with experiences is the experience into a space, and we rarely, it's really tough to get clients to talk about the experience leaving a space. And what's interesting about when there's a fire is that when there's a fire, you and I are trying to leave the space, and there's a whole team of people who are trying to come in to put that fire out. So you run into these contradictory statements where people are coming and going at the same time, and there's a lot of chaos, and somebody needs to know exactly where they're going. So this is the stairwell signage at Cooper Hewitt Museum. I believe it was done by Pentagram. It looks very pentagrammy. Sorry for the low resolution on some of it. It's a screenshot, but it's really sexy what they did with the door there, that you open up the door, it completes the 3. Of course, that door would close. You've got the map there so you can figure out what level you need to go to and what you're going to find when you get there. And again, these are the pictures that we use to sell spaces all the time. And, when I went to Cooper Hewitt and saw this, I thought, wow, that really works. It's really nice. But what I like is over there on the left-hand corner, right? This is the sign that you never see, right? Mm-hmm. This is the sign that's not sold in awards, right? You always try to crop it out. That's this sign right here. So this is part of exit routes, and these signs happen in all buildings, part of the internet, part of the building code. And if you look on the left, I pulled what the code issues are on that. And this is where you can see what some of the challenges are with designing sign systems. So we have a minimum size that we can make this. It's 18 inches by 12 inches. The text at the top has to have a minimum 1/4 inch stroke, right? So I don't think most people are used to thinking of type in terms of inches in that way, but this is kind of the way I've always thought about type. Is I know 72 inches equals roughly a point, or equals 72 points equals roughly an inch, and I just go from there. But it's always trying to figure out what the height of something is in inches and feet, rather than what it is in points or in picas. So I need to find text that has at least a 1/4 inch stroke with and at least 1.5 inches tall. So really thin faces are definitely going to be out. Then down at the bottom, 1 inch lettering, 1/4 inch stroke. The text in the middle has to be 5 inches with a 3/4 inch stroke. So that one right there. So think about putting together a family of fonts to build out a magazine, right?
Right.
And put these types of limitations on that family of fonts, right? It's not just looking at what looks good together and what complements each other and even what's the most legible. It's, and does it fit within this guideline that if it doesn't, I'm on the hook for regulatory issues, right? So this is where it gets fun, is like we can pick all of our most favorite fonts, but then we have to actually do the math and make sure that it fits the guidelines. Another one that we oftentimes overlook, I don't think I've ever seen an evacuation plan that's really terribly pretty. We all try them. But here we've got minimum lettering size of 3/16 of an inch and non-decorative lettering. So no text on here can be smaller than 3/16 of an inch. And there's all sorts of other guidelines that go in here about what about all the text that has to show up in here, about heights that this has to be off the ground, about what levels of information needs to be on there. So it's designing, a system that is elegant and is achieving the goals of the environment, but also fits within all of these guidelines. And so here's that beautiful ripple, right? Yeah. And this is where, things really go to town. So this is where ADA guidelines really get into play. When it comes to room signs, when it comes to ADA guidelines for room signs, you're dealing with, you're basically dealing with signage for the visually impaired. And visually impaired is looked at as people who have a difficulty seeing and or people who are blind. Now, people who are blind make up between 1% and 3% of the population. And of that percentage of the population, a very small percentage of that population reads Braille. However, within the ADA guidelines, we have to apply Braille onto the letters or onto signs and that identify rooms. So if you have the men's locker room that you see here, the Braille underneath it needs to be saying men's locker room. Signs that identify rooms also have to have raised tactile letters, and that's for people who are visually impaired. And so those raised tactile letters, you can see the men's lockers in 307. Those are raised, and they have to be raised 1/32 of an inch minimum from the background. They have to, everything has to be all uppercase. It has to be sans serif. And then what I really love is 703.2.4, which are the proportions. And I think that I forgot to put this slide in here of where I've actually mapped out the proportions. But so not only does it have to be a sans serif, and it has to be uppercase, you then have to have the width of the uppercase O has to be 55% minimum and 110% maximum of the height of the uppercase letter I.
Wow.
So that just rolls off your tongue, right? And then, I think that I might have left something off, but there's also, there's another one where the width of the I has to be, I think, like no more than 15. There's another thing that has to do with the I that I forgot to put on here. But basically, you take, like, anytime that you're looking at a font that you want to use for visual letters, they have to fit within these requirements, which means that you take that text, you set it at 5/8 of an inch, and you outline it, and then you begin doing a bunch of math to see if it fits within these proportions. So terribly condensed fonts aren't necessarily going to work. terribly open fonts, very rounded fonts are not going to work. And then you've got the stroke issues as well. So very, very thin fonts are not going to work, and extra bold fonts are not going to work as well. So it's, now granted, with people going absolutely crazy with font design, we have more and more fonts that we can use every day. But everybody basically winds up keeping sort of a standard track of fonts that they know works, and they can always pull from. Oh yeah, here we go. The thickness of the uppercase letter I shall be 15% maximum of the height of the character. So
Sean just wrote that too in the
chat.
Yeah, he just wrote that. Thanks, Sean.
Yes, yeah. I love this. This is awesome. So then it goes even further, right? Spacing between individual raised characters shall be 1/8 of an inch minimum and 4 times the raised character stroke maximum, right? So we can talk about kerning all day long, but like then you have to actually put this math on top of it, right? And then it goes further. So like what happens when you've got like the 7 and the 8 up there, versus the 9 and the 8, what happens when you have an A next to a W? How do you get the spacing to work out, right? So like all the elements that we learn about typography for developing print are still things that we have to keep in play, because we want to have a nice, elegant, balanced layout. But after we do all of that, we still have to run it through all of this filter. If you look at the line spacing, it shall be 135% minimum and 170% maximum of the raised character height, right? So your leading is, dictated for you, right? You can't run things super tight. You can't run them super open. And keep in mind that everything that you're typesetting is in all caps as well. And then you've got the, then you have the Braille, which, Braille is a font. It is a language. And there's minimum dimensions for the Braille, minimum separations for the Braille from the text. And, it just goes on and on and on. This is what it winds up looking like when I draw it out for production, right? So I'm specifying all the colors. This is not, any sort of mechanical that you would be sending off for print, right? This is getting fabricated. So I'm confirming on here that all of the dimensions fit what are specified, and everything's measured out in inches. It's pretty fun. So anytime that I actually get to do a brochure is really refreshing. Because I get to actually touch something and feel something a little bit more. But this is how I'm used to looking at type and text. This is just another, here's a sign that, a mock-up of a sign that everybody's seen at some point. None of us want to make it this ugly. It's just, again, like 4-inch cap height is what caution has to be set at. Spot capacity has to be set at 4-inch type. All of those guidelines have to be set at 1-inch caps. So, the size of these things are fixed. But and this is where, like, as designers, we want to look at things and say, oh my God, I would never design something like that. And none of us really like looking at this stuff. But at the end of the day, like, this is all here for a reason, right? The reason is to try to keep liability from the company, and it's also to help save your life, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't understand why we need to argue with it. It's there to save your life. It's there for that reason. If I'm going to go back, to these, like, there's nothing pretty about that. I mean, we try to make it as pretty as possible. We try to balance out the size of all the information with, everything that's going on with the materials, and then, keep on, of course, you have the client on top of that as well. You've got the interior designer and the architect on there as well, and their vision for what the thing is, and here you are, dropping this sign right on top of it. It's not sexy, and we're doing everything that we can to make it as pretty as possible. But the reality is that it's there for a purpose. The reason for this is not to be pretty. It's the reason so that you don't die. And that being said, I don't want to make it just all red and white, but I do want to make sure that things are apparent, things are visible, and that it's doing their job. So this one, I just have to bring out this code because the other ones, you know, they say, here's the stroke width, here's the math, you know, it doesn't get into the nitty gritty. California is great for regulations. We have Proposition 65, which is trying to make sure that people know that there's harmful elements in their environment whenever they're being introduced to an environment. It covers a lot of things, but one of the things that it covers is alcohol. And so when you go to bars and places that sell alcohol, you have to have this message: warning, drinking distilled spirits, beer, coolers, wine, and other alcoholic beverages may increase cancer risk, and during pregnancy can cause birth defects, right? What I think is fascinating about this code is when you go down further on it, and I only like pulled a sample of it, the sign can be no smaller than 10 inches wide and 10 inches high. If you go to D, the word warning shall be centered 3/4 of an inch from the top of the sign in ITC Garamond bold, condensed, in 1-inch capital letters. 3/16 of an inch from the base of the word warning is a line going left to right across the width of the sign, 1/16 of an inch in thickness. Centered 1/2 inch below is the warning message, 36/50 in ITC Garamond bold, condensed, with the initial letter of each word other than conjunctive and capitalized.
Wow.
Yeah, that's about as prescriptive as you can get. You know, there's no way to make this sign look, well, there's various ways to make this sign look better than it actually is. But this is the sign, right?
Right.
And, you know, the great thing is that there's a lot of sort of off-the-shelf sign companies that you can buy many of these things from. And so many of us have seen this, and it's black text with a white background, or it's red text with a white background, or white text on a red background. You know, in this instance, we tried to mock it up so that it fits within the rest of the signs that are happening in the space, and, you know, it continues the language. And so, you know, when you have the opportunity to do that, it's great. But at the end of the day, like, this sign is going to look exactly like what it is. And it's rather fascinating that they do that. So switching gears a little bit, another non-sexy type of sign are highway signs, right? Or motor vehicle signs. The spacing between these things is not necessarily the most comfortable. The balance of the weights of the font is not necessarily the most comfortable. Every once in a while I look at these and I say, man, I'd really like to make those a really, really pretty sign. These are dictated generally by the MUTCD guidelines. MUTCD, you know, back in the 1950s, I think, is when the guidelines really started to get standardized, when the Federal Highway Commission, you know, realized, wow, every state is kind of doing things on their own, and maybe we should sort of make those look alike so that when you're driving across the country, you know where you're going and how you're going to get there. So the font that's used is people call it Highway Gothic. That's not really the name of the font, but people call it Highway Gothic. But it comes in Series B, Series C, Series D. I think there's Series A, there's Series E, there's another C. It comes in like 5 sort of weights, right? And you know, they're not and those weights are basically going from more condensed to less condensed versions of the font. When you're setting it and you go into the guidelines, here's Series EM, there are typesetting tools that you can use to set these signs now, but it's very much based off of math. And there's like just these entire grids of calculations that, wait, I just saw Paul Mendoza put the Garamond bold condensed comment on the side. I'm so proud of him for that. Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, Sean, I believe that I'm going to make Sean Adams a Garamond bold condensed t-shirt. But yeah, so everything that's going on with MUTCD is very much just based around math. And again, it's, you know, it would be great to make these things much prettier. But what you're trying to deal with here is the largest wayfinding system in the world, right? Where if I drive to New York City, I'm going to know how to get off the freeway because the signs in New York City are the same as they are in San Francisco. And they're the same everywhere along the way. And they're not sexy, but I know exactly how to get there. I know when to exit and when not to exit. And they have a pretty decent balance of information along the way. They're not giving you too much, they're giving you just enough. Now, back in 2001, Meeker, I think it was Charles Meeker, probably have the wrong name. He was taking a look at the highway signs and was taking a look at the population of the US and was saying, wow, the population is getting a lot older. This older population is driving. Their eyes are going bad. Cars are getting faster. Maybe we should take a look at this Highway Gothic font and see if we can update it. So on the left is a sample of his Clearview Highway. And on the right is Series B from Highway Gothic. And you can see, some of the changes in it. The, the C kind of cuts down a little bit more. The G is a little bit more open. You can see the O's are a little bit more open. There's just, he was looking at getting more white space into this font. And here they are side by side. On the left is Highway Gothic, and on the right is Clearview. So, what's going on here is somebody said we need to improve something, and to improve it, I need to convince the government that this is something that needs to be improved. And that doesn't sound like a task that most people want to take on, but they did. And in 2004, after tons and tons of testing, and you can go to the website to see a lot of the testing, the government gave interim approval for continued testing and use of Clearview. And so I think over the course of 12 years, from 2004 to 2016, I think 30 states wound up signing up to use Clearview. And so, think of how many highway signs there are in any state. And these aren't the kind of things that you put in a change order and go out and just update them all, next weekend, right? You update these things as they need to get updated. So California is one of the states that started using Clearview. And so as you drive around the state, you'll see this font. And from this picture, I remember seeing this article in 2004, and we were all very excited because I think it reads better. It has much higher, it's much rounder. The X height's maybe marginally higher. It's got, these great little turns that really give some good personality to it. The idea is that it reads a lot better in uppercase and in lowercase. You can see the 6s and the 7s are a little bit nicer. And they've gone a lot further, and they've, tried to develop better studies for how to set highway signs. But what happened this year is after 12 years of testing, the government has said, you know what, we're canceling that. All of the improvements that Clearview is shown to have created isn't because of the changes in the font. It's because of changes in technology. It's because we are looking at older signs next to newer signs. We're looking at older reflective systems next to newer 3M reflective systems. We're looking at weathered colors where contrasted was not as strong next to newer prints where contrast is a lot stronger. And then there was some testing that was showing that when you reversed out Clearview, so when you had black text on white, that it wasn't as legible or as successful as Highway Gothic. And I think I remember earlier this year I shared that, my response to that, because I'm kind of stuck, where this is where there's a little bit of a conundrum that I think, just as designers we need to figure out what to do with on our own. We want to say that design improves things and makes things better, and and that brings value to businesses. But what we need to do is get the metrics to really prove those things happen. So here's an instance where the initial metrics said, here's a much better font and it's going to make things safer. And then 12 years later, the metrics said, you know what, that's not the case. So as much as we might think that it's a prettier font or a more successful font, if the data says it's not, where do we go from there? And, you know, more importantly, I think, what's the next step for this? How does somebody now go back to the government and question it again? You know, I don't have the answer for that, but I look forward to seeing what happens with that as we move forward. So, you know, I was thinking about that point the other night, and I was thinking about like how, you know, back when we used to have lead font and wood, you know, we used to have lead characters, we'd print on really terrible paper, right? And there's some discussions about, you know, when you bring back some of these old characters, do you base it off of the cut of the lead, or do you base it off of the printed sample, right? With the idea being, was the type designer's intention for the type to look like it looks when it was cut, or were they aware of all of the bleed that was going to happen with the ink on the various types of paper, and the intention was that it was going to look the way that it looks with that paper, right? So as paper technology continues to increase, you know, continue to get better, the fonts began to change, and you were able to print thinner and thinner strokes. And, you know, as resolutions get better on phones, you know, we can get better and better fonts available for use as that technology changes. So, you know, when it comes to highways and when it comes to signage systems in the environment, how's that technology going to, you know, continue to affect what we're looking at in those environments as well? So, you know, so at the end of the day, technology is going to lead what we're doing next. We'll see what happens with that. Regulations are going to continue, and you just have to love them, because, you know, whether it's true or not, or maybe it's just a way for me to justify what I do. Like, I just think that I'm not killing people today. You know, I actually do a form of design that I try not to kill somebody, which is nice.
That's really nice.
It's really nice. That being said, you know, we need to keep testing things, and we need to keep looking at iconography. There's one challenge, and this is sort of a subtopic, but I will mention it, is, you know, within those guidelines, we have to put men and women on every restroom, right, in the country. Mm-hmm. And we have to put a male and female icon with many of those restrooms as well, right? Well, we've got a huge discussion going on about gender identity and what's the proper thing to say when the regulations on the sign says I have to put men or woman, right? How do you argue against that? Like, how do you fight the good fight for the culture when the regulations say, hey, here's something else that hadn't been considered? Similar issue comes up with handicap symbols, with you know, the, accessibility symbols, the ISA, the person in the wheelchair. You know, when that first came out, it's really set up a system where, you know, we're developing things that are giving a picture of accessibility and is based off of people with physical issues. But the fact is that not every issue is physical. You know, you've got issues with sight, you have issues with how you learn, you've got, you know, there's all sorts of accessibilities that need to be addressed. And, you know, those icons and that text that we're, you know, required to put on doors kind of reinforce sort of an outdated system at this point, something that needs to evolve. And, you know, anybody who's worked with the government knows that updating regulations is not the easiest of things to do. We've got, you know, cost is certainly a big issue, time is a big issue, and rolling things out is a big issue. So I think that's it. I just want to bring this screen up here. Here's a number of websites that people can take a look at if they want to get some more information. You know, this is specific to things that are happening here in the US. Regulations in the US vary from, you know, who has the regulatory authority. So are you doing a federal project or a county project or a city project? Every city is going to have its own guidelines and interpretations of some of these regulations. So you always have to study what's happening for the city or the jurisdiction that you're working in. But I also put in here down at the bottom, WAI, the WCAG 20. That's taking a look at all of these issues, but from a digital space. So when you're doing federal and public projects, what are the regulatory guidelines for accessibility when you're developing a website or a phone device. And the Department of Justice is working on finalizing those things. So I think it's the W3 org. They've got their ideas in place. But I look forward to seeing how that's going to introduce itself into our world as we keep moving forward. What's really nice is that in their guidelines, they say, these are all of the things that you have to achieve. Here's ways that you can achieve it. But if you have a better way of achieving it, then achieve it that way. At the end of the day, you just have to achieve it. Whereas our guidelines say, this text has to be 5/8 of an inch tall. So
very specific.
Very, very specific. So, and I think that's what I've got.
Right.
All
so
right.
Sean was mentioning he can't access the last site, w3.org. Is there a www before that?
There's probably a www before that.
Okay. We can type that in and get that to Sean, or put it in the notes afterwards. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
That was amazing. Yeah. So there's been some great chatter here on the side, but I just want to remind everyone that to put your questions specifically underneath for Patrick, under the questions and topics tab, we're going to give away a book of the signage systems and information graphics to the best question or the most interesting question that Patrick deems. And so we'd love for you to use the questions and topics tab to enter your question. Meanwhile, I was wondering if you could take a look on the chat bar, Patrick. Dominique is in the Netherlands, as you know, and she was saying that every country in the EU has its own system. They have 5 different fonts. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar that there's a number of different systems within the EU. There has been some attempts to pull things together, but think of how stubborn the US is, and all the countries in the EU have hundreds of years on us, so they're just as stubborn.
Right.
And most of them are much better designers than we are. So what I think is fascinating is when you take a look at signage systems around the world, you can see that everybody's trying to achieve sort of the same goals, especially when it comes to street signage. But they all have different beliefs behind it, right? And again, these are massive, massive systems. So I think that I remember looking at Germany. They tried to update their font. Oh God, I don't remember what year it was. They instituted it here and there, and then people pushed back, and they were just like, no, we're just going to stay with what we got. We're good with that. Another thing, though, is that like ADA guidelines and accessibility guidelines and standards in the United States, they really set the precedence for the rest of the world, right? Mm-hmm. It's really great looking at like type systems and signage systems from Japan and from China, and because they're really gorgeous, but they don't deal with ADA guidelines at all. They don't deal with accessibility issues at all. And so, we can't get away with all of the same things. So it's, as much as they can be frustrating at times, oftentimes the frustration is really trying to bring the rest of the team, be that architects or interior designers or curators, on board and say, look, this is something we have to do because it's best practice and it's required. And I know that it doesn't fit your initial vision, but that's why we're all working together as a team to pull this off. We have a lot of visibility for disabilities here in the United States that you don't see in a lot of the rest of the world, which I think is something to be proud of.
Yes, it's very good. And I actually wish we had some type of regulation that's close to that in print design, so that our clients would stop making changes and just say, you know what, the government says this, so.
Yep. Yeah. Although I would love to hear Michael's talk on that once those regulations come down.
So Patrick, we do have some questions, so I'm going to just go through these and read them to you. And so if you can just answering them.
Are these underneath the screen? Is that? Oh,
yes.
All right.
So cool. Eva is asking why you aren't facing strict government regulations. What are your primary considerations for wayfinding signage design? For example, events or outdoor market signage design.
So there's a couple of other regulations that I didn't put into play, which are, if you're giving directions to people, like primary directions, you still have to match, like you still have to fit the visual design characteristics. And then other things come into play, which like in terms of height of the sign off of the ground and viewing distance. So if it's like 8 feet off of the ground and the viewing distance is 20 feet, then I think like you should be looking at like a 3-inch font, right? And if you look at many of these things, you know, it's just good practice at the end of the day. But looking at the whole system, you know, it's legibility and function are the key things. It's location of the sign, right? You know, is it located and oriented in the right way? You know, you're mentioning outdoor marketing and events. You know, what are the conditions that this is going to be in, right? You know, this isn't a controlled space where you have your magazine in front of you or your brochure in front of you or your phone in front of you, right? It's raining. There's 100 people around you. You know, you have to look over people. And so you really have to put yourself in that environment. You know, and then if it is part of a much bigger package, right? You know, you're typically picking up off of the brand guidelines that are already in that space. Or if you're developing out, you know, a bunch of code signage that goes along with it, then that code signage is going to help to inform the types of fonts and the colors and things that you're using. So, you know, it goes back and forth a little bit. But yeah, once you get away from a lot of the code and the regulation signs, you're just building really big stuff, and it can be a lot of fun. And you're just making sure that it's not going to fall on somebody and kill them. So.
Yeah, and I guess in an outdoor market with signage design, you know, you're not driving by it, you know,
right,
very quickly.
Yep. Yeah,
there's less safety issues, so possibly maybe that's why there's no government regulations on that type of design.
Yeah, ish. You know, now some of those. So, is Eva from California?
Eva, are you from California? I think she says she is.
Okay. So, you know, so there are other regulations that come into play. So if it's an outdoor market, like a farmer's market, that, you know, then of course that's like a contained space that you're walking around in, right? If you go to the farmer's market or if you go to the Grove, right? Those aren't, like, when you're inside that interior outdoor mall, that's not necessarily city guidelines that are being used, but then generally in those instances, the developer, like working with somebody like us, we've put in place what the guidelines are for signage around there. So if you're a retailer there, you know, we're saying these are the types of signs you can put up. This is, you know, the types of materials that you can use. These are maximum sizes, things like that. So regulations come into play from the inside as well.
Right.
And that's just, you know, trying to do brand control and, you know.
Of course.
Yep.
I wish there was this type of strict government regulations for people who are designing presentations for screens, because sometimes I just can't read what's on their slides.
I hope my slides did decently.
So Sunday's asking, what is a good resource for color blindness safe palettes?
Oh, I have no idea. That is a great question. I know that in previous issues of the ADA guidelines, there was a requirement that contrast legibility needs to be 70% for visual characters. Now, I know that's not the same as colorblind safe palettes. But if you look at like Matthew's paint guidelines, there's an LRV, level of reflected value, listed with every paint color. And there's a formula that you can use where you plug in the background color and the front color, and you find out what the percentage difference is, right? Now, you know, if you think about it, when you're designing colors, right, you putting green on orange is not a good idea for so many reasons. But oftentimes it's because orange is, you know, typically like a 60% value kind of color. And so you're not going to get strong contrast off of something like that, right? So legibility is going to be compromised regardless. So when it comes to visual characters and visual design, you know, we have to deal with that out in the environment as well as reflection, things like that. But for color blindness itself, that's a good question. I might have to do some more research on that.
That will be the next presentation.
That'll be the next presentation.
Thank you, Sunday.
I'm making a note.
Okay. Bernardo is asking, there's only so much type users can do to make these regulations look better. But is there anything the type design community is doing or can do? Is there anyone out there designing typefaces that meet these regulations?
That is a good question, and one that I ask myself. Well, it's actually one that I ask like leaders of, organizations like AIGA and SCGD all the time. I don't recall the next time that the Department of Justice is going to be taking a look at ADA guidelines. I think it was last updated in 2010 or 2011, and SCGD put out their white paper, I think in 2012 regarding it. Oftentimes there are designers sitting on the panels for those discussions. More often there's signage fabricators sitting on those panels. I think if you look at the history of signage design and iconography, graphic designers used to be much more involved. You've got you've got pictograms from the Olympics. You got pictograms in airport signage. You've got, type styles that have come from many of these. And I don't know that we're sitting at the table as much as we need to. And I don't know that we're really leading the charge. I think to do that, the design community, we have to make a choice to begin to get involved in government. The architecture community is really good at that. AIA, at most cities, they have, you can go down and sit with a city council member as an architect. And so, that kind of sets the tone for who's making the code and who's making the decisions.
Right.
So I think once SCGD and AIGA start doing that a little bit more, maybe we can begin affecting things. But I think, people are looking at user-based typefaces a lot more. There's been a lot of talk in the past 2 years about dyslexia-based typefaces, which I think is great. The studies aren't really backing them up, but, yeah, they are getting better and better. I do see Dominique just said something about Comic Sans.
Yes.
So Comic Sans, I wouldn't put it orange on a red background, but Comic Sans, as much as everybody complains about it, if we're going to talk about users, my wife works with kids with learning differences. The font that they respond to the most is Comic Sans.
Really?
Because it is written the way that they write. So as anytime I design something for my wife, I have to use that font.
That's great. That's great. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that helps, Bernardo. Maybe there's something you can do in terms of type design as well. Bernardo is a type designer.
Oh, good. Good.
Okay, so we have a good one, a really long one. This one's from Paul. My experience with wayfinding design is that government inspectors play a role in the process, like judges in a case, with different criteria and pet peeves. Oh man, we got so-and-so, he's going to want this and this. Do you ever experience this? And if so, does it ever play in your favor, or does it usually work against you?
So, two things on that. One, like just a little sidebar. I just ran into an article called Typography for Lawyers, or a website, Typography for Lawyers.
Yes, that's Matthew Butteridge.
Yes, it's awesome.
Yeah, and he's
it is
a lawyer.
So incredible. And he's a lawyer, yeah. And there's so many regulations that are just built in for, doing law type design, and they're terrible. It's horrid. But he broke them down, so it's really nice of him. Thank you. Now that being said, it's so getting signs reviewed. Yeah, you go through a review panel. A fire inspector, oftentimes. The people who are reviewing it, they have their interpretation of the code and you have your interpretation of the code, and they don't always match, right? So doing environmental design, you really have to become a strong advocate and continue to remain educated about what current code is, what upcoming code is, and how it's been interpreted in other places, so that you can really advocate for the place, and so that you can really have a solid conversation with the inspector. Does it go your way or not? I mean, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Go sit down with a fire inspector, design a museum exhibition and sit down with a fire inspector and place exit signs and, show them the same plan twice and you'll get 2 different answers from them. But yeah, you really have to, like, you have to be an advocate. You have to really be aware. You can't just leave it on the inspector. You know, you have to be able to have an intelligent conversation with them about it. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Paul. Sorry, Paul. Paul wanted me to mention something about the AIJ design, AIJ
yes,
membership, so I thought I would just skip that part. Okay, so thanks, Paul. Sean is asking the question that I had when Rachel introduced us on Facebook. I was designing a poster for a city client, and she said that the minimum point size had to be 12 point. Is there a minimum type size for printed material as opposed to mounted signage?
You know, you would have to take a look at what's written for that city code. I don't believe so. You know, on the other hand, you're talking about a poster, so depending on what the size is and what the use is, you know, and if you're knocking it out of a colored background, I would say, yeah, go with 12-point font.
Sean says it was ADA, supposedly. His client said it's ADA.
Huh. We're going to have an offline conversation about that.
Okay.
So that I can find out more. I mean, let's see. There are guidelines for temporary signage. Let me put it, there we go. For temporary signage, depending on what the use is, there can be guidelines in cities for what those are.
Interesting.
But yeah, but follow up with me on Facebook or on email and we'll talk about it more.
Thank you, Sean, for asking. Okay, we'll do one more question. Amy is asking, do you ever see highway signage and wayfinding becoming obsolete? As technology continues to advance as a culture, we adopt computer-based navigation. What new challenges do you see this creating?
That is the topic of my study for the next, I don't know how long. I love this conversation. You know, the nature of wayfinding, technology has always affected our natures of wayfinding, right? You know, once, you know, it used to be that, you know, you built a big pyramid or a big castle because you could see that in the distance. Before that, you know, it was, you can see the mountain in the distance, and so you know you're going in the right direction, or you're navigating by the stars. As technology began to improve and, you know, roads began to get improved, you could follow this path, and so anxiety begins to decrease because you kind of know where you're going, and mile markers start coming into place so you know how far you've gone. Hot air balloons get invented, and so now you're looking up above things, you're getting a bird's eye view perspective on things, and so your nature of place and how you're picturing things begins to change. You know, zooming up to now, you know, the iPhone just had its 10th birthday, right? Like we still don't know how to use it. We're still figuring out how to use it. And a lot of the problems that are being solved are really being solved with the same old solutions, but with new technologies. Now, I think that that's beginning to change more and more, and some of the benefits, you know, are also some of the challenges, is that people are looking at technology as the solution, you know. So we don't need to put signs up, and because everybody has their phone, they know where they're going.
Interesting.
But, you know, but at the same time, how much do we want people looking at their phone while they're driving, right? Yeah. So then as cars begin to get more autonomous, then do you need wayfinding signage? Possibly, you know, if for no other reason than just the sense of arrival, right? But are automobiles going to be the only way that people are navigating? Or are you still going to be walking or riding horses or, you know, taking bicycles, and, you know, and so are there reasons for signage for those reasons? And then once you get out of your car, do you want your phone yelling in your ear for where to go? Do you want to be looking at your phone to tell you where to go? Or do you want to be actually interacting and experiencing with the environment around you or with the people that are around you? You know, Paul Mendoza would be mad if I was looking at my phone the whole time he and I were walking down the street. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of good opportunities. Certainly, other like benefits of technology and phones is that for people with various disabilities, they are able to navigate in a much better way, right? You know, they can get audio solutions and verbal cues, which are much easier. What I'm actually interested in is now that we're beginning to have smart clothing, that is tracking how people are moving, will I be able to have...
Ooh, Patrick, did we just lose you? Uh-oh. Can you guys... There you go.
Am I still here?
Yeah, you're here now. I can hear you.
Okay.
You can't see you moving, though, but...
I don't know.
There's the answer to the technology question.
Yeah. It's, I think that, as clothes get smarter and we're walking down the street, can my clothes just sort of tell me that I should be turning right now, right? Or tell me that I should be turning left, or tell me that I arrived without doing it. There's a great Radiolab article about a guy who walks around New York City with earth magnets in his pocket. And the reason being is that the magnets are always being pulled north. And so as he walks around New York City, he can always orient himself because of the direction the magnets are being pulled. That's, old school technology. It's the way that birds navigate. But is there a way for our phones to be able to interact with our clothing in that way? I don't know. But, I also think that just, put me in an autonomous car, 40 years from now when everybody's in a self-driving car. And do you really want all the signs gone on the highway, or do you want something that says, Santa Monica's 3 miles ahead? I mean, I don't really have an answer for it.
I think that goes back to your first couple slides when you were talking about safety.
Yeah.
If there was no signage anywhere, how do we feel safe?
Yeah. Anxiety is a big deal.
Yes.
You have to feel safe before you can, reach aspiration, right? So.
Right. So, Amy, that was a lot of questions on your question, not necessarily an answer.
Sorry. Well, so highway signage might become obsolete. Wayfinding will never become obsolete. Because wayfinding is actually what you do as a person, and way showing is what I do as a practitioner. Is I develop the systems to show you, and then you do the aspect of finding. So
it's great. Thank you. No, those are great questions, guys. I really appreciate it. And actually, Patrick, thank you so much. This was a wonderful discussion. I just love the topic.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But off the top of your head, do you remember one of the more interesting questions that you've ever been asked before?
I'm blown away by the colorblind one.
The colorblind one.
Yeah.
Okay. So that was
that one just hadn't crossed my mind before.
Great. So Sunday, you won the book, The Signage Systems and Information Graphics. Yay, we'll send that to you. Thank you guys for hanging out with us and listening to Patrick talk about how the government controls our type. Actually, I think it's a great topic, and I'm sure it could be brought up for also the interiors of cars and other things that are, that we need the standards in order to ensure safety while we're multitasking and doing other things. Okay, so it looks like Sean is going to start a live meetup.
Okay.
Great.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Patrick, and thanks everyone who joined us today. And we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Patrick.